right, I'm on with Theryn in Canada. Theryn, how are you?
I'm good, thanks. How are you doing, Dave?
I'm doing well. I've been enjoying talking to all these great people. So what's going on up in Canada these days? How's Canada?
Oh, Canada's fine. Not as libertarian leaning as I'd like
Yeah.
as a libertarian myself, but I'm working on it. I work with an organization called Students for Liberty, and I'm currently going through training to be kind of in charge of the Canada sect of Students for Liberty. So working towards liberty, yeah.
Yeah, well, as you know, I've kind of been into libertarianism lately. I think it's very close to classic liberalism, which is really where I consider myself. But speaking of your political leanings, my producer told me just a minute before we connected that apparently you're in Breitbart related to something about Milo.
Yes, I just read the article this morning.
So can you tell me what it is? He literally just screamed something in my ear and then ran off.
Sure. Well, the name of the article is it's called Trannies for Trump, and it's basically talking about trans women who either like Donald Trump or support him fully. I don't fully support him, but I like him in many ways, and I think his presidency could in some ways actually be helpful.
Yeah, but that's a strange place to be for a libertarian, right? Because he seems to be a big government, more of a liberal guy, but I think you like the sort of trolling, unpolitical correct idea, right?
I don't agree with his trade policies. I think that they're economically illiterate. I don't have a particularly strong stance on his immigration policies. Yeah, so no, I don't really like that. And I read an article just the other day that if he becomes president, that things like taxes would be risen and minimum wage would. So not that much.
Right. So it's a strange place for a libertarian to be.
As I said, I don't support him, but there are certain parts of him that I like.
Yeah. All right. So you gave me a lot on your email entry. So let's dive right into it. So first off, you're a men's rights activist, correct?
Yes.
So can you explain what that means? Because I think a certain set of people get that, and then another set think that's something crazy, but I think the bulk of people just don't even understand what that means.
Mm-hmm. So a lot of people don't necessarily realize, or they're not informed about the fact that men are falling behind or are discriminated against in many ways in today's society in Canada, in America. Whether it's the high suicide rates, whether it's the high rates of homelessness, whether it's, men kind of getting the short end of the stick legally nowadays with all these rape cases. And then there's domestic violence, which is also a huge problem, and men really don't get seen. And the statistics and the knowledge on the reality of domestic violence isn't really known to most people. So I'm more than just an advocate. I'm an activist. I lead a men's rights group on my campus at Simon Fraser University. And we host monthly events inviting different people with different perspectives on men's issues. We had Karen Strawn and Alison Tiemann last month, and then this coming up month we're having a panel discussion event on different perspectives of masculinity, from men going their own way to mythopoetic, which you probably don't know if you're not into the men's movement, and then there's the feminist perspective. So we're going to have a whole panel discussion. So it's really about boots on the ground activism and really engaging with people.
Yeah.
So I'm kind of I'm one of the people taking the online sphere offline and trying to raise awareness one-on-one.
Yeah, so I think for the average person watching this that doesn't know much about these issues, they're probably looking at you and saying, wait a minute, here's a trans woman into men's rights issues. That kind of flips everything on its head. Does that give you a certain cachet within the community?
I think that it gives me a lot of freedom to say what is true without being labeled misogynist or a sexist or this or that. I say a lot of things that if some average white guy said it, he would be maligned. I think my being trans has helped a lot for our club in the sense that we haven't been protested much. We haven't protested at all. We haven't got too much backlash, and I think it's because in the kind of regressive mindset, attacking a group that's led by what is in their minds an oppressed minority would be oppressing a minority even further.
Right. So you're sort of like,
yeah.
So you're sort of like kryptonite in a way to them, and because they judge you not by your individual ideas, right?
Yeah.
But they're judging you as solely a trans person. They know the trans person is high on the oppression Olympic chart.
Yeah.
So then they can't really figure out how to attack you. Thus, you're able to protect your own ideas. I mean, it's actually kind of genius and also bonkers.
Well, it's genius and yes, bonkers. I kind of realized that very early on. I realized the reality of men's issues and how there isn't a lot of spokespeople for men and men who suffer. I realized that if not me, who, and who better than a trans woman? I realized right away the position I'm in and how I would be squandering a really great opportunity. So I totally use my identity as a trans woman to further men's rights, and I'm not really ashamed of it because I want to help men and I want to further the discussion.
Yeah. So obviously I get the part that you've sort of insulated yourself from some of the criticism, but when you do get the criticism, does it feel particularly personal to you because you're trans and that, I talked to another trans person, that's sort of like the thing of the moment?
No, I don't know. Criticism I get from kind of the regressive side. I don't know. They don't generally try to really steer away from the fact that I'm trans. Mm-hmm. A lot of them, the criticism that has been like lodged at our club, haven't even recognized me as the president. They kind of they wouldn't touch it with a 10-foot pole. And I mean, I get criticism for being a female men's rights activist in general. I mean, there are a lot of people who take issue with that because it's just kind of perpetuating, everyone focusing on women,
Are there other women in the group?
Yes, it's actually our executive team is 3 women and 1 guy.
Wow, that's really fascinating.
Yeah. I find women are it's a lot easier for them to approach. Let's say we're tabling at club days. It's so much easier for them to approach our table and start discussing, and they don't fear. I find a lot of men are kind of wary. They're very afraid that they're going to be judged as a certain, they're going to be judged as misogynistic or sexist, or why are you associating with those people? So yeah, it's actually quite a bit easier to attract women. But then when I hear about the men who do come talk to us, the men who kind of muster up the bravery, I hear quite horrible stories, from being, horribly abused by their girlfriends or having narcissistic mothers and abusive fathers, and just I hear really the truth of what's going on. And yeah, I would encourage men to come to approach us more, because we are in that sense kind of a safe space, if you will.
Okay. But you don't like safe spaces, right?
I don't like safe spaces if that means that you can't talk about certain things. But that's not really what it means in our context. It more means that we won't malign you if you feel certain ways. If you feel angry, because a lot of men are angry, and I understand that anger, I'm not going to tell them that they're just misogynists and sexists. They're not going to get judged. They're going to have at least an understanding. Yeah.
Right. So it's not a safe space of ideas. It's just a safe space of judgment, which are two different things.
It's an understanding, compassionate space. How about that?
Yeah. So what's next after this? So, when you get out of school, is this something that you want to pursue at a career level, or are you interested in other things altogether?
Well, I'm currently finishing up my music composition degree, which is completely kind of separate from what I'm doing here. But I actually want to go into law and probably constitutional law. But I think in my path in law, I can definitely influence some real, at least legal change where it helps men, but also just defending constitutional rights and human rights on a very basic level, and kind of putting my effort into keeping the state small.
Yeah, that's the libertarian part. There you go.
Yes.
All right. Well, listen, we could obviously do a lot more, but unfortunately we gotta cut it short. So I really enjoyed talking to you, and good luck with everything.
I enjoyed talking to you as well, and thank you so much for the opportunity, Dave.
All right, I'm on with Tomi from the UK. Tomi, how's it going?
Very good. Thank you very much. How are you?
I'm doing well. So your story, everyone's sending me these great sort of life stories and what they want to talk about. There was something particularly interesting right at the beginning of yours. You're originally from Nigeria and you moved to the UK the day before 9/11. So you moved on September 10th, 2001. Can you describe a little bit of that?
Yeah. When I first got the news about that, I was at the top of a double decker, the sort of British buses.
Sure.
With the two level buses. I was at the top of that. And that's when we heard the news about that something has happened in New York, some explosion or something about buildings. And then we got home, and then I sort of saw the pictures of what happened. And, I didn't really understand the gravity of what had happened. I mean, I understood it was, a horrible thing, and that many people died, but it wasn't years later that I sort of really understood, the world has changed in a radical way. So that was sort of my earliest memory coming into the UK. So in a sense, it's sort of a baptism of, fire of sorts. Yeah.
Talk about a crazy time to move to the West. So let's back up a little bit. Tell me a little bit about growing up in Nigeria, what kind of family you came from, and what made you guys move to the UK? Or did you move by yourself? I'm not sure.
No, I moved with my father. My mother is a nurse. She was a nurse for many years in Nigeria. And so because you do know we have an NHS here, and there's a high demand for nurses in the UK. And so she moved over to the UK about 2 years before we moved to join her. My father was a journalist and used to be an editor in oil and gas magazine in Nigeria. So we moved together, myself and my younger brother, we moved together with him. And we moved basically essentially to have a better education in the UK and to be with our mother. And so that was, a little bit history. My family history.
Yeah, what was life like in Nigeria? People, you hear about Nigeria, but we don't know really, at least here in the West or in the US, we don't talk about Nigeria that much. Tell me a little bit about what it was like.
Growing up in Nigeria, life was fun. You're out there with your friends playing. It was, childhood was the best time, because there was just no care in the world.
Yeah.
Although during the time when I was growing up in Nigeria, we had a dictator, General Sani Abacha, and he was a very ruthless guy. Destroyed the country in a lot of ways, economically, embezzled a lot of money. But Nigerians are very resilient. They are probably the most resilient people in the world. They, you put them, in the middle of a Sahara desert, they start sending you sand. So, so Nigerians are very resilient. So we got through, we survived, we did well, went to school and things like that. But towards towards the time I was coming to the UK, he passed away, and there was massive parties in the streets and everything like that. So,
wow.
So that's how much hated he was.
And then did another dictator come in right after him? I don't even know the history.
After that, we had a civilian. We had our first democracy after many years of going through generals and dictators, basically. And so we had Obasanjo, who became president, and he ruled, but he was also corrupt in many ways. And he's also from the same tribe that I am in Nigeria. But many from my part of Nigeria, especially my dad, did not like him because he was not a fair man. So we had that. But now we're a country that's struggling a lot. We just had our president gone to the UK for some anti-corruption talks. And he's trying to get back some money because the country has been really hammered by by previous regimes, basically.
Yeah. All right. So let's flash forward to today. One of the things that you wanted to talk to me about is something that we've touched on the show on just a tiny bit, but Brexit. It's obviously huge for you guys over there. Now, you support Brexit, right?
Yes, I am a big supporter of Brexit. I'm a big supporter of Brexit as a Nigerian. I'm a big supporter of Brexit as a first-generation immigrant, and I'm a big supporter of Brexit as a British citizen. And it rests essentially on this principle. I asked myself this question: if I was in Nigeria and I found that the Nigerian political system was controlled by another political system that was based in Cairo, that's in Egypt, and they passed our laws, they told us what to do with our fishes and in our waters and all that kind of stuff, I'd be upset about that.
Yeah.
I'd say that's not fair. We can't. Nigerians should have control over their own laws and over their own borders and everything. So I look at it from a point of view. If I was a Nigerian, living in Nigeria, and this was happening to Nigeria, how would I feel? And take it to the UK now, that is exactly what is happening to the UK. We have a situation whereby we have a European Commission that is not elected but passes law that we have to abide to, and we cannot vote them out of office. So it's essentially a sort of a dictatorial system of sorts.
Yeah. So how much of your feelings about that is fueled by just the border situation? Because one of the things, I think we've done about 12 interviews now, and one of the things that almost everyone has wanted to talk to me about in Europe is the immigration stuff and the border stuff and the migrant stuff and all that. So how much of your feeling is just wrapped up just in that you want the UK to be able to control its own borders?
I think that's a very essential part of the Brexit argument. But the border situation is tangential to the real issue. And I guess since I'm not an indigenous British, the way I feel about immigration might be slightly different. But I have a lot of sympathy to the indigenous Brit who are saying that, and if they feel the sense that the country has been overwhelmed and they have no control over it. Mm-hmm. So I have an appreciation and I sympathize with that. My biggest problem is that if we do not give nations control over their borders, it will lead to a situation of social tensions. And as someone who is an immigrant, and I'm black, in case you don't know,
I had no idea.
So as someone who is an immigrant, I feel like if you create so much social tension within the system, there will be a backlash. And so my biggest worry about this whole EU control and the control the EU puts on different nations is that it doesn't allow nations to act autonomously. So it doesn't give them that sort of self-will to do things. And that leads to frustration. And that's why we see the rise of the far right and the far left in Europe now.
Yeah, so I'm curious. So as a first generation immigrant, it's really interesting. You're framing this not only from your perspective, but you are looking at the people that lived there before you and saying that they have some legitimate fears, or maybe some of it's not fully legitimate, but you're acknowledging it. I'm curious, has some of the sort of regressive ideology, has that affected you in that I think most people would probably look at you and say that you're black and that you're an immigrant and that you should be for fully open borders or something along those lines?
I like to say this. I'm a fair-minded person, and I also like to deal with the realities of life. So back in Nigeria, where I'm from, in the late 80s, we had a massive influx of immigration from Ghana, which is another West African nation, into Nigeria because they had an economic downturn. But that put a lot of pressure on jobs and services in Nigeria. And there became this chant, this movement called Ghana Must Go. Now, that wasn't a sort of a racist movement, but in that, I could see and appreciate that whenever you have a massive influx of immigration, uncontrolled immigration into another place, it leads to social tensions. And you can look at it throughout history and throughout everywhere in the world. And so we have to deal with this fairly. I'm pro-immigration. Immigration is good, but it has to be controlled, it has to be sensible, and it has to be at the behest and at the will of the people. If not, it's going to lead to trouble. And that's where I think this discussion needs to be had.
Man, you're talking a lot of sense. Why aren't you on TV over there?
Nah, it's you know, I don't speak a lot of PC stuff, so I'm not PC.
On that note, I'm going to let you go without saying anything. I'm going to let you go without saying anything too crazy. It was a pleasure talking to you. All right, I am on with Marcelo, who is in Maine in the United States via Brazil. Am I correct?
Yes, you're right. I'm from Rio de Janeiro, Brazil.
That is quite a move to go from Brazil. It's hot and now cold. People are supposed to go the other way. What are you thinking?
Yeah, I actually lived before in Connecticut initially when I moved to US. Then I lived a little 1 year in Miami. So I kind of experienced the warm back. And now I'm back in Maine. It was just mostly for my work.
Right. What kind of work do you do?
I'm a physician.
Right. Okay, we're going to get into a little bit of that. I knew that, actually. But so one of the things that you wanted to discuss with me was how regressive attitudes and this ideology had really infected Brazil and how you saw it change attitudes in Brazil. So can you tell me a little bit about that?
Yeah. Brazil overall is a pretty hardcore leftist country. The culture in Brazil was taken over by hardcore socialists in the last about 30 years. They took over the churches, the press, the universities, and they have this mindset of not wanting to debate ideas. So the way that they see things is that if you do not agree with them, then you should shut up. You should basically get out of the way. And this is quite concerning because you see people who have this will to learn and to get into debate, and I think that's how countries progress. That's how debating ideas. That's how you get to a common sense, to a place for everyone.
You're speaking my language, brother.
There you go. And that's actually what caught me to your show initially. This idea of fighting for free speech. And Brazil basically they was killed. And now, in the last 10 years, I would say there's a conservative movement surging. Still small, still not in power, but at least there is another way of thinking kind of surging. And people are interested. People are actually looking to it and amazed. Whoa, this exists? Oh, that makes sense. And that's very interesting. And it's very unfortunate that Brazil went to that direction.
So that's really fascinating. So you're saying basically in the last 10 years, as a result of this regressive ideology taking root, that now conservatism is bubbling up, and that is what is defending free speech. It sounds a little backwards for the way America is, although right now I see that happening here, because strangely it's conservatives that are defending free speech and the left that's trying to stifle it. So it's really, everything's kind of upside down.
Yeah, I totally agree with you. And I'm not sure if there's a direct effect of that or if it's just people really, when they read about new ideas, they get interested, even if they don't agree initially, when they have the freedom to do it. So there are some thinkers, some writers in Brazil that 10 years ago started writing some stuff, and that's when actually I started reading more about conservatism, more about America, the free speech ideas, the individual rights, and the idea of you're able to say whatever you want, and you're fine. And if you don't like it, that's fine. That's fine to not like it. And that's not the way in Brazil before. And I saw, for example, journalists actually having to move away from Brazil in order to be able to speak. And that for me is something unacceptable. It shouldn't happen.
Yeah, I have to say that until I read your email, I really didn't realize how bad things had been in Brazil. So one of the things that you wrote that was interesting is that you started getting interested in conservative writers, and that sort of helped your awakening. And now you're saying many years later, these conservative ideas are becoming cool again down there. Who were some of the writers that you were interested in?
Well, initially I started reading Brazilian writers, and one of them was a philosopher called Olavo de Carvalho. He currently lives in Virginia. He's a well-known philosopher, well-known writer in Brazil, who actually had to move away. He's one of them, and he lives in Virginia, US. He's a big fighter against communism, against socialism in Brazil, a free speech guy. After starting reading his stuff, I then started reading American writers like Tomi, Henry Hazlitt, and Von Mises, other guys from other countries as well. Von Mises and from the Chicago School, Milton Friedman. More recently, I've been reading a lot of things that Dinesh D'Souza writes. So there are a few conservatives, and they usually, these guys, they defend free speech. They defend a free exchange of ideas, and some of them were actually leftists before, like David Horowitz was a hardcore leftist.
Yeah.
Thomas Sowell was a leftist, and when they got in contact with the ideas of conservatism, they kind of leaned the other direction.
Yeah, I've really been doing my best to get Thomas Sowell on the show. I don't know how much public stuff he does anymore, but I'm working on it. So stay tuned on that one. So you move up here, and you've already seen the damage that these ideologies have done in your home country. So what do you make of what they're doing to America right now?
It's like seeing a movie again. And it actually changed a lot. I feel like it changed a lot in the last, let's say, 7 years since I moved. Not sure why, but I see happening things that I never thought it would be possible here. When I moved to America, I thought, the universities here are the best universities in the world. They probably have very free environment for new ideas, for speech, for debate. And then when we see cases like Mizzou, where the professor was saying, get some muscle here to shut off a student, a journalist student.
Yeah.
And then you say guys that, just to stay with guys that you interviewed there, Shapiro, Milo, being, there was violence against them. And they cannot even speak anymore in campuses. And you see leftists, even leftists, Powers, one of the journalists wrote a book about the left shutting out.
Oh, Christina Powers, yeah.
Christina Powers.
Yeah.
So even these guys, people are, wait, this is not cool. This is not nice. This is not good for anybody.
Yeah. So what do you do in your own personal life to combat this stuff? I guess this is the example of it right here.
Right.
You're talking to me, so that's pretty good. But really, as someone that has seen the damage of this, and you see this happening now, do you post stuff on Facebook? Do you try to get stuff out there to combat some of this?
Yeah, I use my Facebook a lot. I have a lot of American friends. I have Brazilian friends. I'm very political on Facebook. I'm glad that I still live in a country that is very free, that I'm not afraid like I was in Brazil. People in Brazil are afraid of speaking out things against the government, for example.
Yeah.
Here, no. I feel comfortable. So I'm very active in Facebook, and I usually try to use the experience that I have in Brazil and post to my American friends so they can see the parallel, like to try to avoid it. It would be horrible to see America go in that direction. It's very bad.
Do you have American friends that are defriending you yet and blocking you and all that stuff?
Maybe. Keep track of them. But
yeah, I guess in some cases you wouldn't know, right?
Right.
Okay, so the other thing, let's move away from politics a little bit, although everything is political. So you mentioned that you're a physician, and one of the things that you wanted to talk about was the free market and healthcare. We don't have a ton of time left, but can you just go with that? Tell me what you were thinking. Yeah.
Basically, just a short thing. In Brazil, we have free healthcare, meaning the government takes over everything. And that's exactly where I see people dying for lack of basic care. People waiting in lines for 6 months to get an MRI when they have cancer, they die in line. That's very common. And I believe that as anything else in life, when the free market is able to work, it works better than the government. So I think in that sense, we're going the wrong direction. America has a very good healthcare. We have problems that can be solved. We have to sit down and see what the best policies to get. But I think the fundamental idea is that we should go towards more free market, because competition makes prices go down, makes things more available, services more available. I want a system that gives us iPhone, new TVs, new cars for cheap. I don't want a system where to give my healthcare to bureaucrats who spend $1 billion to make a website that doesn't work. Right.
So for you, in the personal sense, as a physician, how have you seen the healthcare economy change? It's obviously changed hugely in the last 3 years alone. What have you seen firsthand?
Well, I work in a hospital, but I think the hospital, we hadn't had the hit from Obamacare yet, but I see a lot of people who work as an office outside with patient schedule, outpatient, retiring because they just can't handle it anymore. I see a lot of regulations coming in, increasing the prices, because every single regulation, every single pile of new rules costs. So when you get more government in between patients and physicians, you have bureaucracy, you have more costs, so prices go up. And I've been seeing this, and we don't have the Obamacare fully implemented yet. I think there are a little more things to come, and then maybe make things even worse.
Listen, if I ever need a full frontal lobotomy because of the regressives, is that something you can do?
I'm not a neurosurgeon, but I don't want you to have a lobotomy. I think you're a very good fighter for freedom. We need you.
All right, fair enough. Well, listen, it was a pleasure talking to you. I wish we had more time, but we got to keep going.
It was my pleasure. Thank you so much for letting me participate in your show.
All right, I'm talking with you from Switzerland. How's it going?
I'm pretty fine, yeah. I'm fantastic, actually. Thanks for having me.
Good. That seems like the answer that someone from Switzerland would give. I'm pretty fantastic. People think everything's great over there, huh?
Well, life here is actually pretty great. So, yeah, everybody's happy around here, and we need to show that.
Yeah.
You know?
I like hearing that because, we talk about a lot of heavy stuff on the show, but it's nice to know that things are working. But one of the things that you mentioned you wanted to talk about is the dreaded regressive left and how their ideology is changing society in Switzerland. So go ahead.
Well, the regressive left in Switzerland, or the equivalent of them here, they're not really out there in your face like in other countries. But their actions speak volumes, of course, I mean, they've always been there, but yeah, and they keep on stirring the pot, I mean, we recently had a case like in Theryn, that's just around the corner from where I live, in which, two boys from a school from Syria with a very strong religious background refused to shake hands with a female teacher.
Yeah.
And, you heard about that?
Yeah, that made news here.
Yeah, and the reason behind that was because they didn't want to sully her dignities by touching her, right? And this, of course, all stemmed from their father, who is preaching at a local mosque. And yeah, this stirred quite controversy here. And, and of course, the reactions were huge, I mean, you had the right shouting all the way down there, it's not acceptable, and yada, yada, yada. And you had the left playing everything down, saying like, it's just a handshake, if you want to go do some handshakes, you can go to the streets and do that. It's not big of a deal at all. And most of all, they all kept on saying it's not against the law. It's fine, right? But I think what annoyed people more, and the reason why they were so passionate about the whole ordeal, was because the decision of the school by just tolerating that without actually any afterthought, which is quite a regressive thing to do, And, of course, concerns were made, by the people by saying like they want to start this discussion, It's not particularly about the handshake itself, which also refused the moderates in our country. And they just asked themselves, they wanted to start the question, like what is acceptable in terms of integration? What is acceptable in terms of religious freedom, And this basically has been washed down by just saying like the left saying like it's not a big a deal, It's just I mean, and they also interviewed the head teacher from the school, and he also kept on saying it's not against the rules, and that's about it, Just don't want to put ourselves out there too much, And this annoyed quite a lot of people because the reason why they feel passionate about this whole ordeal was not because the handshake itself, is because the discussion, which has never been actually made, this was kind of, a big deal here around.
Yeah, so it's not about the actual handshake. Nobody really cares about that, but it's just about the creeping idea behind it, which is that these boys will grow up and not necessarily respect women or treat women as equals, and then that becomes an actual societal problem. So it's not about a bunch of young boys, whether they shake this one person's hand or not.
Well, I think it was more about like, what are the ground rules of integration here? We just want to talk about that. And we don't actually want to talk too much into the future because we don't know what actually would happen, It was just like, let's just talk about it. And at some point, it was just not possible anymore. And it didn't end at that point, actually. I mean, the pot kept on stirring and stirring, And there was another recent case in another city, in Lucerne, which is quite a famous destination here in Switzerland. But there was actually a Swiss dentist, who refused to operate on a patient. The patient happens to be a Muslim woman, and she refused to give him a handshake because, it's just a thing she doesn't do.
Right.
And he refused to operate on her because his argument was, a patient-doctor relationship is based on trust. If the trust is not there, I cannot, by the best will and by the best capabilities of my conscience, I cannot operate on her, And of course, this has, blown up again, like people asking, like, haven't you made something like a Hippocratic oath or something, And he said, like, yes, I did, but it only counts with emergencies, and she can choose whoever doctor she actually wants,
Right.
And this actually the same thing, just in opposite positions, Yeah, it has no end here,
Right. So this is like with us, it's like these bakers that don't want to bake a cake for a gay wedding, and it's like, what should the role of the government be, and should we force people to do all this stuff? So one of the other things that you wanted to talk about was the amount of Americans that are moving to Switzerland. So that's a different type of immigration that you have going on there. Tell me about that.
Yeah, you can see the other side of that story too, yeah. I mean, of course, the amount of Americans still pales in comparison to the EU, which the most people immigrate to Switzerland come from. But there are quite a lot of Americans coming here because Switzerland is a place where it's home to many major global companies, And of course, eventually they get chances to come here and lend themselves an expat program. And after some while, they can go back. And most of my co-workers actually decided to stick around a little bit longer because they learn to appreciate the high wages and the security and the nice infrastructure. And before I sound too optimistic, too positive about Switzerland, of course, there are some bad things here as well, like the depressive Sundays here where everything is closed. And,
Right.
And the high cost of living. But usually they like the social security network here around and like to stick around here. And the thing is, I have to tell you a little story, sorry about that. We are also a household where we speak a couple of languages, right? And we speak also English. Before my daughter entered the kindergarten, we had to fill out a form explaining how good her German was, actually. So she can keep up in the school, which is actually, it's a sensible thing to do. And after sending the letter I received from the Department of Education, I received an angry letter actually demanding for me to organize German classes. And of course, I was actually surprised. I was calling up asking what's the reasoning behind this, because I do speak Swiss German pretty well, actually, being a citizen and so on. And she actually was very surprised. She thought like, oh yeah, I'm sorry about that. I mistook you for someone else because, there are some people who have more issues. And I thought about that, my name, Asian, maybe she thought about Asian people who do actually have some difficulties learning Swiss German because it's pretty bad. And she told me actually, no, I thought you're American because the American, she told me in private, of course, the American are among those people who have most difficulties they have most difficulties to want to learn Swiss German, actually, because one of the reasons is because they're just going to be here for 5 years, and the others is just that refusal because and that's what she said, it's like there's actually no need for us to learn, because you can also all speak English, which is actually true. Most people actually in the area I live do speak English, but it's actually, the reverse thing of the whole thing, I mean, it's like, of course, not all the Americans, I mean, I have many friends here who are Americans, they're not like this, but as I found out, my surroundings is not quite representative because after, this whole thing interested me, and after learning more about this, I really found out that there's really with some Americans here, a not willingness to let themselves assimilate, based, and after asking, after calling up my ex-employee who happens to work with the Office of Statistics, he said, like, it's because, they have something like, not all of them, of course, it's with all of them, but
Sure.
Some of them have something like a special snowflake syndrome, like something like we do it all well anyway. You can speak English, so why should I,
Right, and that's really fascinating because it also shows that all this integration stuff and immigration stuff and migrant stuff, it's not just about religion, it's culture, because now you're telling me that Americans are coming there. It's not because of religion that they're not integrating, but it's partly language, only going to be there for 5 years. They're used to always speaking English. Listen, we could go on way longer, and I didn't get to I didn't get to half the stuff I wanted to talk to you about, but we got to go. So I thank you very much. All right, I'm on with Stefanos from Greece. Stefanos, how's it going?
Everything is all right here, and as long, like I said previously, as long as I have still money in the bank, despite the capital controls being implemented, I can still live.
All right, so that seems like a sort of depressing but good place to start. So we don't hear much about Greece in the American media, but you guys are going through a massive financial crisis right now. So I know you're not an expert in economics, but can you sort of lay it out, just what the average person in Greece is going through right now?
So let's just say that the minimum wage here is 500 euros.
Okay.
And show me one household that can live like that. Just show it to me. It's impossible. You can't do that. No, and I can say, fine, it's 500 euros, but can you at least tax me slightly less? But no. Thanks to the memorandums that are being imposed by Merkel and the rest of the EU officials, we have to pay we have pretty much the taxation of Germany and the wages and benefits of Uganda.
Right, so basically you guys, because of the conditions that the EU helped Greece out with, your taxes are very high, and you have a lot of people that are getting a lot from the government, so there's not a lot to go around. Is that pretty much fair to say?
Yeah, and it's not only the EU's fault. The number one, the ones responsible for this, in my opinion, is my government. The Syriza and Anel government that we have right now, and the ones before them. New Democracy, for example, PASOK, etc. So they're responsible for this.
Yeah, so how do you feel? I mean, in general, look, democracy came from Greece. Modern philosophy came from Greece. Greece has given so much in terms of freedom and free thought to the world. How do you feel about what's happening in Greece at the moment?
Yeah, if only that existed here, because it's pretty much extinct species by now here. And the problem here is that let's just see the elections. The elections here are being held by a company called Singular Logic that works with the government to count all the votes, etc. So at the surface, it's all fine and dandy until you get to realize that this company belongs to the Rothschilds. You know, the ones, the big bad bankers, which, to be honest, they kind of are, and they're, I think, behind the scenes of all this nonsense.
Right, so you guys are sort of caught between the European Union and the bankers that are kind of funding the election, sort of,
They're the ones benefiting from this crisis.
Yeah, all right, let's get away from politics for a minute, because it obviously can be pretty sobering. One of the things you wanted to talk to me about was Gamergate, which a lot of people jumped on the Gamergate idea. Anything specific on Gamergate, or how did you get involved in it? Were you in it from the beginning?
I was involved in it the moment I heard about the story of Zoe Quinn having sex with one of the journalists in Kotaku when he posted a review of, what was it, the Prison Quest, if I'm right? Yeah, that game. So it is quite obvious that all these gaming journalism websites are corrupt. And all these feminists, the SJWs, and all these people defend this. Like, why would you defend this? They don't care about gamers. They don't care about us.
So that's why I was so interested in Gamergate, even before, I used to be a gamer, like in the 80s and 90s, and now I love the culture around video games, but I don't play that much. But I thought the whole thing was fascinating because you guys were dealing with so much of the stuff that we talk about now. The gamers were dealing with all the social justice warrior stuff, all the collusion between, creators and the publishers, and all of that, and feminism, and all of this stuff. And that sort of seeped up into society, which is a good transition for, you also want to talk about cultural Marxism. And I think that's very much related. So how is cultural Marxism, the ideas of it, taking root in Greece right now?
I could say that Greece pretty much invented cultural Marxism.
Really?
Due to the fact that we have parties like Syriza and to an extent other parties like Antarsia, which is not in the parliament right now. They get like 1% of the vote or something. And they're radicals. And there was also PASOK, also known as the Socialists, which was responsible for the crisis that we live right now. Like, they were promising to the people things that on the surface are needed, like high wages, high pensions, benefits, and all that good stuff.
Yeah.
But what they did, let's say during the 80s, they tripled the wages. So that's fine, but they did it while not acknowledging that in order to do that, you have to take some countermeasures as well. Like, you have to decrease taxation for the company so that they can pay their employees. They didn't do that, and as a result, a lot of industries that we had back then, like we used to create buses, for example. We had a car industry, small but still relevant at the time. And as a result, they all closed down. And the situation was getting worse and worse until now that when we happen to be in the EU, and despite the things that were being told by the media that, oh my God, the EU is our home, and if we leave, we'll turn into North Korea. It's fucking laughable. Like, how am I supposed to take you seriously after saying this?
So basically,
all the problems that we have pretty much have gone plus 10, right at the moment we joined the EU and the Eurozone in 2001, I think.
So when, I guess it was about a year ago when the financial crisis seemed to be at its worst, right before the EU came in and bailed out. Again, what you're saying is a pretty crappy situation. But what was it like when you couldn't go to the ATM and get money out? Didn't they stop money coming out? Like, what did that feel like for you and for your family when it feels like the system is like collapsing?
It's pretty difficult. The fact that you had to take only 60 euros per day from the ATM, and yeah, we had to adjust to that.
All right, listen, we could talk about so much. We went pretty heavy here. Listen, where's the best place for souvlaki in Athens?
There are several restaurants where you can buy gyros and all that, but I can't really tell. It's entirely up to you, but one warning.
Yeah.
If you see gyros that have like a lot of olive oil, avoid it.
Stay away from the gyros with a lot of olive oil. All right, well done.
Yeah, they are not really that tasty, at least to me.
Fair enough. All right, Stefanos, it was a pleasure talking to you. Thanks, man.